This chapter we're going to talk about some people's favorite thing is change. Some people like it and some people don't. Some are very vocal whether they like it, and some are very vocal that they don't like it. And throughout life, we know that there is always going to be change. Change is constantly happening around us, and it's how we look at it and how we plan it and adapt to it and prepare for it can make a huge difference. So as we look at two types of change, we're going to learn how organizations can actually move ahead with changes that can benefit nurses and your patients. Several things as leaders and managers need to do is when they're looking at a change theory, they need to make sure that everything continues to be safe and effective in the care of their patients during this time, that it's that they have everything in place so that no one's affected negatively or in an unsafe manner. They also need to be in charge of it and make sure that they have a good change agents to help implement this change. Support staff needs to be coming in to help out while a change is occurring on a unit to help cover staff's questions, help to implement whatever that change is, but also to help to take care of those patients. Also, it's important that we all recognize our own reaction to change. Sometimes we know it's coming and we don't like it, we don't want to, but it's going to happen. So it's how we look at that and how we adapt, and our attitudes can definitely come into play, and how this is going to be implemented. You can, individuals can either make it hard on themselves and hard on everyone else around them, or they can go ahead and say, this is going to happen, so I've got to go with the flow, and I need to do my best and learn how this change is going to affect me and my patients and how to implement it. Also, too, we're going to look at different ways that change can occur within a facility. As I said earlier, it is constant and change is unavoidable. At some point in time, you're going to have a change, and it's going to involve you, your organization, your staff, your patients, your family, whatever, but it's going to affect many people, and again, it's part of life, and so it's how we adapt to that is going to make a difference. Some of the characteristics of change, some of it can happen very fast, some of it can, sometimes it kind of happens so fast you don't even know what hit you, and other times it's a very slow, productive change, and it seems to be lasting forever. It can be very complex, or it can be something very simple. Two of the types of changes that we have is your planned change, and this is where it's planned, it's organized, it's a definite, deliberate. They've been planning it, they're prepared, and the goal of this planned change is to improve something. When you have an unplanned change, people get very upset because it's not anticipated. And it's very upsetting to others. So again, this is something that we need to think about. When you have a first order change with plan change, it's where you're going to take those small baby steps and prepare and get everyone ready, and before we implement it, we're going to make those small changes, and we're going to hopefully keep everybody on board and prepared along the way. When you have the second order change, this is very episodic. It happens very quickly. It requires adjustment by individuals or a facility or a unit, and it's hard to sustain it sometimes because it happens so quickly and everyone's not prepared. It's like when you sometimes there's a change that happened, and everyone was talking about it, we're going to implement this, we're going to start doing it, and then everyone went back to the old way. And you're like, whatever happened to that change? Remember we were going to do this. Well, it was unplanned, and it was never settled. It was never solidified. There's 3 stages when a change happens. It's the unfreezing. So in other words, stopping what we were doing before, and then you start implementing the new change, then experiencing the change, going through it, picking up on it, fixing little things about it that might not be right. You're still going through that process, and then you refreeze, which is solidifying it. It's here, we've evaluated it, it's here to stay, everything's done, and that's how change happens. So you have it unfreeze, then you experience the change, and then you refreeze and keep it. When we look at a planned change or a linear change, a planned change is very slow and methodical in its approach. It's viewed as linear. A planned change typically deals with predictable changes. For example, determining how to educate all staff on the use of a new piece of equipment. A common way that we can view planned change is look at Lewin's force field analysis that's in your textbook, and this analysis allows us to look at all the elements in a situation to determine what barriers that might be there that we're going to have to overcome and how quickly we can make this change happen. Your barriers and your facilitators can refer to elements of the change, such as getting all that information that you need and gathering that, securing the funding that may go into it. Do we have the funds in the budget? And then, and the people, and then any needed equipment, including any technologies that might be out there. What they can refer to, people or groups of people, is usually some of your change agents to help propose the change and help to back it up. So they'll actually come up with a map and say, this is how we're going to do this. Have you been, and think about this, and we can talk about it in class, but have you ever been part of a pilot program where when they go to implement the change, they pilot it in a small area, so then that way they can work out the kinks and make sure everything's good to go before they go hospital-wide. So lots of times that can happen. Your facilitators are going to be those people who are your, I remember when they did EPIC, they had the super users. These are the people who were trained ahead of time, and then they're going to go out and help train the other nurses and be their support systems. So those are also known as your change agents. They're going to buy in to the change and help to implement it. Now you see this crazy picture. And this is the second type of change. It's nonlinear, or it's more of a complex change. Nonlinear, this is more like a web. So everything is connected. It's pulling on one piece, which moves another piece, so that pattern starts to appear, as you see here, that little swirly-durly thing. Most change in healthcare is complex because it's going to involve a lot of people and your clinical and any types of organizational changes. So think back to the figure of this change. When this happens, the interchange between what is happening within the organization and what's going to happen externally to the organization is going to really help to shape this change. As an example, think back to when a hospital has an expansion program. The community has bought into the change because the community members saw the end results. Now think about what would happen if there was a major delay for this, or an explosion occurred on the site where they were building this, or maybe publicity was focused on a way in which the building expansion was how it was being funded. And suddenly the community is no longer supportive of this. Now the organizational representatives, they're going to be spending more of their time managing external relationships more than the change or the project itself. So I hope that helped a little bit explain. Then here's your supermen. These are your change champions. They're going to help to get things going. They're going to be those people who are going to say, yes, this is good, this is what we're going to do, we're going to help, and we're in on it, and we're the cheerleaders. So although each situation has to be analyzed, there's usually some common barriers that are going to exist for almost every type of change. So the first thing you have to look about is your budgets. If the change doesn't save money, at least in the long run, it's going to be difficult to secure support from your administration, because they're going to be looking at accountability of cost. Even the planning sessions are going to cost money. People have to come in, and so with these sessions, care's not being provided by nurses if they're involved, because they're pulled away from the bedside and from the units. Equipment may be focused on, such as accessibility of the equipment and the involvement of purchases and how much it's going to be. If the equipment, let's say, has a high degree of unreliability that maybe consume a lot of important staff time, the chances of the change being adopted is going to be null and void. It's going to just go away. But on the other hand, if the equipment that they want to change to can save time and increase safety or reliability, it's not a barrier. So that's good. People who have value status quo or are fairly averse to change are typically barriers to your change. So to convert them to being at least a neutral individual about this change, it takes effort on the part of your group leaders. Often people who prefer the status quo see no benefit to themselves. They want it to take on a proposed change. How that insight is developed is challenged by your leaders and your managers. And you're going to see others say, I don't see how this is going to benefit me. And lots of times people don't buy into a change unless they see how it does benefit them. Finally, you have groups who see the change as a threat and are not supportive at all. And if their numbers are sufficient, they can actually be the powerful opponent to this whole change. Sometimes the reason a group opposes a change is because they see the change as taken away from, their power. This is my unit, and how dare you change things? You're not here, and so they don't like it. So these are difficult challenges to take on. Other times they oppose change because it's just has not been described adequately, especially in terms of patient care benefits. An example of that would be when a healthcare took on the added task of specifically identifying the limb of that's going to be amputated. Some groups thought that was an unnecessary task. However, the publicity that went around when people were having the wrong limbs, amputated, is going into the news. That publicity surrounding the mistakes was definitely compelling, and they bought into it. Well, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be one saying, well, if we do make a mistake, we make a mistake, and we're going to be identified as those individuals. When we look at some of this list here of characteristics of your change agents, common facilitators usually include many elements, and most of your basic facilitators are your data, but data alone can't convince people to do this change. So a second facilitator exists when there's community support available out there. So let's say a hospital is trying to expand, and they have this project, and surrounding areas are often disadvantaged. But if the members of the community see the traffic issues will be fewer and access will be improved, they will often get engaged in supporting in this change. So one of the key elements that we may see in facilitation exists when people buy in to provide, and when you to be able to provide this change. These two groups are big changes that occur within the healthcare organization, and two of the biggest buy-ins are going to be your physicians and your nurses. Most important, though, is the driver of the change. And a lot of times the driver needs to be patient safety, and this is where people are going to buy in the healthcare field. If the benefit to the patient is clear, it's usually easier to get more people to buy in. from your important groups, including those physicians, nurses, and of course the community. So you have to have people to buy in, and they have to see the benefit, and the benefit has to outweigh the negative. Another thing is having a sense of humor. Change is, not the easiest thing. I'm very familiar with it. I'm getting ready to have to go through a big change, and I'm using humor to get me through it because I know it's going to be a huge undertaking, but I can see the advantages. I'm buying in. I'm not looking forward to the work that goes behind it, but sometimes we have to use that little bit of sense of humor too. So it's better to be that positive change agent and say, what, this is going to happen whether I like it or not, and move forward. Some of your responses to change, again, we're all human, and so everyone has a different I guess maybe reaction to change, and so it's sometimes I think feelings sometimes are hurt because people won't buy in. You're like, why don't you see my point of view? And it's nothing personal, but not everyone sees everything the same way. If we did, it would be a very boring world that we live in. So we have to realize that human side, and lots of times people aren't very receptive. Some of your patterns that we'll see are listed on page 311 in your textbooks when it comes to change and different responses. And so you have your innovators, your early adopters, early majority. You have your late majority, your laggards, and then your rejectors. And then we have to look at systems and technologic side too. Do we have the support that we need? Do we have the monies? Do we have the people and the resources? So there's a lot that go into a change. It's not something that just happens overnight within a facility. If it's a good change, it's going to take time, and it's not, people aren't going to just jump in and say, oh, this is what we're doing. That's not the way we can do change in the real world. It'd be nice sometimes if we could, but there's a lot that goes in behind. And again, I'll mention red tape too, in state and standards, budgets, and so forth that go in there too. So here are those different reactions that we see. Again, these are just descriptions. I'm not going to go through these. You can read these on these next two slides. I think this is interesting when they talk about change management functions. If you look at it, of course, it should look a lot like the nursing process. I think I shared that with y'all last week. One of the ways to implement change is looking at your strategies and anticipate everything, the good and the bad, and every little minor detail that goes behind that change. If you were there during the epic change, that's one of the biggest, most recent. That was very widespread change, and it took a while to get on board and get everybody in, but to even begin to even have the process, all the research and work that went behind the scenes before it was even brought forward to staff and administrations, learning, and your physicians learning how to use the EPIC system. There was a lot that went in behind that, and so there's a lot that goes on with your strategies, and then lots of times, again, they'll do the pilot programs so they can work out any bugs before they go hospital-wide to make these changes. Anytime you have change, you need to listen to those who are involved and make sure you have a good connection with them, have trust, empower them, let them be a part of it, let them contribute. That's a huge in getting people to help to buy in. And again, making sure you facilitate and manage how you're going to do this and your staffing and what's going to be involved and how the staff is going to be involved, because that's what they're worried about. How is this going to affect me when this change happens and when we're starting to implement it and we're learning about it? These next few slides are just a fun little thing that you can actually do an assessment of yourself to see how receptive you are to change. So go ahead and try it if you want to on these next few slides. Here's part 2. And then these two next slides have different tips on leading change. And most of it's pretty self-explanatory. And here's the rest. And when you look at these, think about times that you've been through a change and did some of this happen? Did you see this happening? Or maybe it was happening and you didn't realize that's what was going on, and now you do. Last but not least, recognize when change is needed. Sometimes it's not needed. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of an analysis and look, do we really need this change? Are we okay with the way things are going? Why are we wanting to do this change? Be proactive, not reactive. Know how you react to change. And some of us don't like it. It changed, we get very comfortable. Like y'all like to sit in your same seats and be in your same sections. You get very comfortable. And if somebody's sitting in your seat, think about how you react. Wait a minute, I'm going to have to sit in a different place. So think about that. Expect people to respond to change differently. Not everyone's going to buy in. And again, it would be a very boring world if we all thought the same. And then be prepared for change. It's going to happen. And in the healthcare field, you're going to see a lot. So it may be useful to be an obstructionist if you cannot see the change as beneficial. Be prepared. Voice your opinion, but have something to back it up. Once you're clear, and however that the change is positive, you're either an agent or a follower if you see that it's beneficial. And you can be very fluid in this change. Be a part of it. So let's say when a nurse manager is present, you may be the follower. And when you're working with a preceptee, you may be an agent. So change requires a group of people working together to be effective, no matter what role you're in. And sometimes you can be in several different roles in one day just by your participation in this change. So let's say if you may change your role being your staff nurse and you're working as is. Then you have a student who comes up and you're going to precept that student. You're actually going to change in your roles. So not only do we have changes that can happen within a facility, but a change that can happen within you just by your work day and what you're doing that day. You may change into your educator role. So there's different ways we can look at change. So stay open-minded and be prepared.